And that kind of brings me to this panel. And I call it the way of women, you know, like the way of life, that sort of Tao Te Ching kind of thing going on. And I'm saying, you know, I'm asking the question of like, how have we welcomed women in scouting over the years? Now, normally I would have one of our esteemed women actually lead this particular panel thing, but because I am by default the Roundtable commissioner and I didn't have someone to do it, you get me. So I will try my very best, right, to ask some really pertinent questions. And let me introduce, first of all these great women scouters that we have on this particular panel. First of all, we've got Tina Chang from Troop 1, a scouter since 2015. Am I correct on that? Am I getting the right number there?
Yes, we joined Cub Scouts in 2015. We were looking for a Cub Scout pack, and I happened to run into Bob Deaver while I was trying to purchase a tent over at Eastern Mountain Sports. And he wanted to find out how many people was I buying this tent for. I said, "Oh, me and my son." He says, "How old's your son?" I think Skylar was maybe 7 or 8 at the time. And he says, "Well, you know, would you be interested in joining a Cub Scout pack?" And I said, "Yes." So we went to the meeting that night and been there ever since.
That's perfect. You actually answered the very first question I was going to ask of all of you. You just went right into it. Perfect flow. That's how you should all make me look good. Like I ask good questions. I didn't even ask a question. You did it right. Okay, perfect.
Oh, and I was a Girl Scout and a cadet.
Excellent. All right. Robin Pulos is another member we have on the panel here. And she's from Troop 662. And I believe you're the troop committee chair. Am I correct about that?
I am the troop committee chair, yes.
And I said that you were around since about 2018. Am I right in guessing that number correctly?
I think it's been a little longer. My older son joined the troop, and I would say I think it was about 2013, or Cub Scouts about 2013, when he was in 3rd grade, I think. So, and he's crossed over to the troop and is now an Eagle Scout. And I'm still engaged. And I was my younger son, who is now 1st class Scout. I was his den leader all the way through Cub Scouts, from Tigers to Rebel 2s as well. So I've had many different hats.
That's awesome. That's like a much longer history, and I love that. Okay.
Yeah.
And you have the middle son too, right? Which is the one I know very well.
So Teddy's the middle one. He's the Eagle Scout, and then I have a daughter as well, who I was her Girl Scout leader for many years. She made it through cadets, got her silver award, and stopped, and she's now a freshman in college. So.
Wow. The whole shebang. All right, I like it. All right, then we also have the esteemed Louise Berry. Louise Berry has been, we were having a great conversation. I was trying to guess the number of years. I think you've been a Troop 664 Cub Master and then the Scout Master, somewhere around 20 years. Am I correct about all that?
Over 30 years.
30 years.
Probably 1990. I was trying to think. It was when my 38-year-old son was 6.
Okay.
That's amazing.
And Barbara was one of my role models when I joined.
Actually, I came in a year later.
Oh.
In the fall of 91, because Peter went in. Eve O'Brien the mother of Mikey O'Brien, was trying to organize PAC 414 at Immaculate Conception Parish. David went to a meeting in the fall of 90, but nothing worked out. Then there was a parents meeting, fall of 91, and Eve was going around coercing people into jobs. And I thought I better volunteer for something, and, you know, get what I want. So I became treasurer. But I thought you were involved longer than that, Louise.
No, it was when he was 6, so it had to have been
same age as Peter was 8.
1989, 1990.
No, probably 89. Peter was 8 when he came in.
That's amazing. I graduated from college when you started joining the Scouts. That's fantastic.
But Pat Bain is not on this, but she was involved from the first moment. She took David's her oldest. No, Richard's her oldest to Cub Scouts. So I'm sorry she's not on this.
All right. Well, we've got 2 of you with a long history. You're almost like having an extra panelist, Barbara. I like it. Okay. All right, good. So I'm going to ask a question to each of you. I've got about 5 questions here, but I'm going to riff off what you guys say. And starting with, I think, Tina, you already answered. You guys all excellently answered how you got in. Although, Louise, I want to ask you a little bit more about your moment when I get to you, about how it all happened and how you ended up joining it at that time. But for right now, I wanted to know, Tina, what was the most surprising reaction from the male leaders that you joined up with when you actually joined scouting? What was the most surprising action that just hit you that very first time?
Probably with Bob Beaver being surprised that I was going to take him up with his offer and be there that night. Yes.
It was amazing. Like immediately you said yes, right?
Yeah, because I had been looking through the website trying to get a sense of where the Cub Scout packs were for New York City, because I live in the Bronx, but Skylar tends to go to school in Manhattan, and I wanted to do something that was convenient enough. But I mean, the way that the addresses are just listed, it's just like you just have what the address, a contact number, and if we're lucky, a time and meeting day that it occurs. But there's really no flavor to it outside of that. It's really, really just a bland listing. So I wanted to get a little bit more personality before I started shopping around, because it's exhausting, looking for places with a child in tow. That's a lot of work.
It is.
Especially during the school week.
At that particular moment, did you what made you think about scouting? What had advertised it to you, made it interesting when Bob Beaver offered that to you? I mean, you were shopping around, but why did you decide that scouting was the thing that you were going to do with scouting?
I was already looking for scouting. I think I was looking around for maybe about a year or something. But we also had a emergency prepper group that we belonged to, and I still belong to. So we were active with camping with that particular group, but it's mostly adults. And so I felt like it would have been better to find a scout troop or a Cub Scout troop for my son, just because there would be more age appropriate activities.
It sounds like Bob was really, he reached out immediately and asked you. He probably didn't know what you were going to respond and be Tina Chang, which in my experience with you, you say yes to everything and you immediately like leap in. But did you find, it sounds like even at that moment, you were completely welcomed and excited. I mean, they were really like saying, come into the troop and we're excited about having you and all that sort of stuff. Was that the experience you were having?
Well, yeah, because a lot of things lined up, because I only have Skylar for certain days of the week, because he also spends time with his other parent. And then, and also because the Cub Scout troop and the Boy Scout troop meet on the same nights, which is something that I like. I like to have mixed ages, because, every person, every kid has certain phases where they're really good at something and maybe not so good at something else. And those phases change over time. So having a blend of ages really appeals to me, especially for the kid that I have.
It sounds like it was good. Like it was a really good experience and you immediately took it up and you felt really comfortable in that whole world, right? Pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think it also helped that one of the parents in the troop who is gay, and that appeals to me. Even though I'm not gay, it appeals to me that somebody else is gay.
Absolutely, I understand.
Yeah, well, it's just, well, the way that I kind of raised
Look at the world.
myself.
It made you feel good, right? To feel in the world in which you that
Well,
welcome, right?
it's not just about feeling good about diversity. It's more like, I don't know, it's probably not politically correct, but like I would have been someone who people would call a fag hag. So lots of my friends in high school and in college, a majority of people were just gay or bi-curious or bisexual. So that's like
Absolutely.
something I'm really comfortable with.
That's a good thing. I mean, actually, you're just telling you that's the truth of it. It really felt comfortable for you to know that. So the troop was very open and very free in that way, which is kind of a great thing. And that, it certainly changes the dynamic of a particular troop when now that's out there, particularly, in a male dominated thing, if you've got a different kind of experience going on, right? So this question's for you, Robin. Well, I'm gonna ask you the same one just to begin with. What was the most surprising moment, when you entered the troop and you were brought to all these male leaders that were, I don't know how many women were actually involved in the troop when you joined. I don't know, 6.
Yeah, in the troop, not so many. In when I started in the pack, which when I joined as a den leader for the pack, I had actually just said, who's going to be leading, the next year's Tigers, because my younger son wants to join. And they said, you are. So that was how that all happened. Yeah, but so so I did that, and there was another mother who was leading in the den ahead of me, and otherwise it was all mostly men, right? So she and I spent a lot of time together and coordinating, and her son is in our troop as well. But in any event, when I came into the troop, there were not a lot of mothers at the time that were very engaged, except Brian's wife had been involved in many different levels, and there had been other women. So I think the troop was pretty used to women coming along and women camping. And, I do find that many camping trips, I'm the only woman that's there, or, at Kiowa, I know Tina and I have spent some time at Kiowa together. But it's, I don't mind that. I think it's, historically, it's fine, and I'm a house with mostly men. So I'm perfectly accepting in that area. But I think our troop has been really supportive of any female involvement, and makes every woman feel very comfortable everywhere, which is really I think is fantastic.
That's fantastic. It sounds great. I mean, what I'm loving is the answer to this question is really good. I kept it open-ended because I'm curious about it myself. Your experience is unique from mine, and I don't know exactly what that's going to be. And it's kind of wonderful to see how much openness, and your troops really they immediately offered you a position the minute you walked in, right? They basically said, we're going to sign you up, right? Which
I think that, anytime they have, a parent that's, seeming to be engaged and wanting to help out, definitely looking for adults to do that. And look, I'm just as guilty of asking other people that too, right? They show up on one camping trip, and next thing you know, I rope them into being an ASM or some other role, right? But
I love it. It's really great. It's great to hear, actually. It's very very uplifting to hear all of, and also too, I mean, I think it also speaks to just something about scouting in general, that we should all realize that, if someone looks like they're going to say yes, pull them on immediately. Do that. So right. Louisa, this is for you. When you started 32 years ago, right? What was your reaction? Was it similar to these guys? Was it similar, different, or was it a really different time in that scouting had different issues at that time?
It was a very different time. I started with Tiger Cubs.
Okay.
When Tiger Cubs were, as lions are now, did not meet with the troop, with the pack. They met separately. So I had to gather four or five other mothers with their kids, and we met most of us were from PS6, so we would meet in the schoolyard and go off and do some kind of an activity, and occasionally go down and join the activities that the full pack was doing, but we weren't terribly integrated with it. And when we moved into the next level of scouting, we had a parent who had decided that he wanted, because his son went to PS6 too, that he would move the troop from Central Presbyterian Church, where it was at the time, he would move it up to PS6, where we were for a year. And he wanted to control it. He wanted to be in charge of everything that went on, and kind of delegated responsibilities out, but not giving much leeway to anyone else. It stayed at PS6 only for about a year, because we only had the cafeteria, and trying to do 5 dens of boys doing different things all in the same room was not possible. So we moved back down to Central, and the fellow that was running the troop and actually was the scoutmaster at the time was very supportive of anyone who wanted to come and do anything. And there was also a Girl Scout troop there that we were closely affiliated with. And that group loved to camp. And that was the one thing I had no training in. I grew up in the country, had no trouble picking up frogs and snakes and things, but I didn't know about tents and fires and all of that. And that was a problem. I couldn't find training in that. Eventually, I took Boy Scout tolls. And I also was in the very last all Boy Scout with badge class, because I had not been able to find the training I felt needed as a leader of this group of kids that I was taking out camping. So it was a very, very different kind of feel at the time.
How did that wood badge go? How was that experience of wood badge at that
That
moment?
was great.
Fantastic.
It was great. I was the only woman in this group of, our patrol had like 5 people in it, and me, 5 men and me, and we did very well together.
And you felt good about it. It sounds like you guys are all having pretty good experiences with all this. This is awesome. Even then,
Yeah.
well, the feeling was much more, you were very much a kind of a trailblazer, because there wasn't a lot of it at the particular time. It still felt very natural for you and very comfortable, right? That's awesome to hear all that. So Tina, you and I have had a couple conversations about, just because I like your term for it, we all have seen it. It's a very hip term these days to talk about mansplaining, right? And it's just a term that you use because you're kind of a hipster using those kind of words all the time, and I find it amusing.
Oh, I'm too old to be a hipster.
Yeah, well, whatever you are, you speak the hip talk. If you're not a hipster, you fit in the world. You can pretend it for right now. Pretend you're young. Pretend you're wearing a beanie hat and you're walking around and hanging out with a bunch of friends up at, in Brooklyn at the top by Williamsburg or something like that. All right, so okay, so Tina, so what do you mean by that when you talk about a little bit about mansplaining? You seem like you're very comfortable in your troop and you feel very welcomed and that sort of thing. What would you say is mansplaining is explained as something that is sort of difficult and always happens a lot these days still in response to some of the experiences you've had? So I'm just going to turn it over to you and you can kind of explain what you were talking about when we were discussing that.
Well, I generally don't experience that in our troop. Although sometimes we'll get some New York Cub Scout parents and they're pretty good at trying to establish by themselves by denying me my experience. And it's really kind of annoying. And I think probably the worst experience of that was at one of the treks, the training extravaganzas, the one that was downtown in is it Manhattan Borough College, and where we needed to have a representative to attend that workshop so that we can understand how they were going to phase in girls into Cub Scouts. And they were saying, oh, well, you have to have 4 girls to have a little Cub Scout pack. And I said, but what if we just have one to start off with? And they said, well, then don't you know about marketing? And as somebody who used to work for Time Magazine, whereas my portion would bring in like more than $100 million a year, yeah, I do. But that doesn't cover the rules of what was being established. So, because you always start off with 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and it doesn't happen all at once. So it was really annoying. And I told this guy to not mansplain. And he says, well, I don't know what you mean, but this is what I mean. And I'm like, oh, forget it. We'll just do whatever we want, and we're just not going to report to you because you don't really care about us to begin with. So I figured, well, okay. Then I got on the phone and I spoke with Bob Deaver and I told him what was going on. And Bob's all like, oh, don't worry. We'll do what's right for ourselves. So, I mean, I think Bob, although I think he's going to be 80 soon, he's been really reasonable and very helpful. And although he may be in that classification where people might think, oh, you know, crusty
He has
old
been
guy
around for
from,
a long time.
yeah, well, from Kansas. And
Well,
actually, his dad was had joined the Boy Scouts within the first few years of Boy Scouts of America being established. So,
very
you
cool.
know, so their legacy in Boy Scouts has been really long. And I just feel like, okay, you know, Bob's seen a lot of stuff. He's heard a lot of stuff from his dad, and that you know, Boy Scouts or Scouts of, you know, Scouts BSA at this point has had a lot of flexibility in its entirety. So some people who just have a sliver of experience, you know, even if it may be a decade or two or three, it's really just their experience, you know, because like Bob has his father, himself, and then two sons that are Eagle Scouts, and they're in their 40s. So, you know, together they've got well over a century of Boy Scouts.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I think he's very, you know, he really embodies the spirit of scouting with its inclusiveness and patience.
Wow, I'm really enjoying this conversation because it's fascinating. You went from like mansplaining and saying, yes, it happens, but it was like a real, you're saying that's an outlier. You're basically saying those kind of things are very rare, particularly in your troop. You felt like your troop is a very particularly welcoming and open space. And it sounds like all of you have been having an experience. And that's
Yeah.
really interesting to me. I mean, I didn't know I left it all open to you guys to talk about whatever you wanted. And I'm fascinated by this, for me, just to sort of watch it from the outside, you know.
But even at Camp Kiowa, where, you know, we've got troops from all over New York that are attending, a lot of the other parents are very, you know, other parents of the scoutmasters are very inclusive. You know, a lot of them really care about their kids, about scouting in general. They care about the other scoutmasters. They really care. So I think it's healthy. It's a very healthy place to be.
You know, maybe there's something to be said also too for, I wonder if this conversation would have been very different before sort of scouting's change in the numbers. Maybe in the 90s, like Louisa, when you first got into it, in the 90s, we kind of peaked out at about 6 million scouts, right? And scouters involved in the organization across the country. And now we're down to somewhere around 2.1 or maybe even less than that. Efren probably knows the numbers. I always rely on Efren to give me the facts that are going on right now. But it's come down a lot. And I wonder if the tightness of the community has changed some of the dynamic between men and women and also their parts in scouting. Because I'm just listening to how things are so different now, and it feels very comfortable. And it's fun to listen to you guys and hear these kind of conversations because it feels like everything's very welcoming. So, you know, it's just an interesting thought. I'm always wondering about what's the dynamic that's created those moments, you know. Robin, speaking of that, can you think of any moment, you know, just out of curiosity, because everything seems so great, can you think of some surprising moment where you thought maybe there was going to be an odd reaction to your strength? I mean, I know because I've worked with you a little bit. I worked for you enough to like know that immediately you've got some strength and you're an organizer. You know what you're doing and you get in there and you solve problems, right? Was there ever a moment that you were surprised at how easy it was or how difficult it was at first when people were just sort of taking on the reality of the fact that you're a very strong leader by nature and it's something they have to sort of, you know, adjust to? Did you find that was easy or was it difficult in any way with men in particular?
You know, I think within our troop, it's pretty easy because I think, you know, the adult leaders in our troop are very appreciative of anyone who's, you know, capable of being organized and leading and being efficient and being helpful. You know, I think sometimes when you're surrounded by larger groups of scouters, it's a little bit different. You know, I think, you know, sometimes at Kiowa, I have found that the interaction with some of the other troops, I can find then it's a little bit more surprising. And, you know, and I think it's when times that I think are more meant to be fun, right? Like the, you know, the shotgun shooting or the softball game. I think that there's generally not very many women who are stepping up to participate in those activities. And I think that the men can generally be, you know, a little, oh, we'll let you try. and are then really happy when you do well, right? But they want to provide lots of instruction and let
The
there's
mansplaining thing comes in at
yeah.
that moment. That's
So
when
I
you
would
start
say
seeing
that
that, right?
definitely there it seems to happen, but not in a nasty, aggressive way. And I don't
No,
think
it's very,
anybody is, meaning anything by it. But I think that may be the time, or assuming, I would say sometimes men will generally assume that they can do things better sometimes and
Oh,
step in, setting up a campfire or helping teach a skill or something else. And, I would say outside of my scouting life, a lot of men are really surprised that I'm capable of doing all the things that I'm capable of doing, and willing to, head off in the woods and spend, a week with a bunch of boys at scout camp, or, on a weekend backpacking trip, or whatever the case may be.
You'll see the
So-
surprise, but you're not saying that most of the time, like when it's at Kiowa and when there's some sort of fun event going on, you hear a little bit of it. But most of what you're saying is some men may be surprised by it, but everybody's they're excited by it. Like in the end, they get like, wow, I'm on board
Yes.
with this. This is great.
Yes. Although I will say that, they're not surprised that other male scouters are capable.
Oh no, that's
Right?
exactly what that's what I'm getting
So,
at. Right?
it's, I think that, I suppose as more and more women are stepping up and getting involved, but I think maybe it's not the norm that they're used to, which is surprising to me, because I feel like there's, at
Plenty
least
of
the
women
women
out
that
there.
I have met, even within GNYC, so many. So but I guess, maybe I don't know what the statistics are across the board of how many, women were involved as, adult leaders in scouting 30 years ago versus today.
Well, I know it was a lot less during Louise's time, and that's
Mhm.
that's like a segue into that moment. Definitely a lot less since that time, and of course, I was around doing scouting at that time too, and I saw a very different situation. But I would say probably more of the things where there wasn't a lot of welcoming quality probably happened 30 years ago. But it sounds to me like we really have become, regardless of the numbers, there seems to be a very open space. And yeah, there's surprise, and there's the typical thing that men do. They want to presume, particularly in physical events and in things in scouting, they want to presume that they know more and that they're, and I do it too. I'm a man. I make mistakes just like everybody else, right? I assume you don't know you're not, right?
As soon as a woman gets into the rifle range,
and she is
most
like
of them.
Our shooting sports center was an Olympic level shooter, and she was the rifle range director, and it was really good for people to see just how amazing she was. And
But even there are people whose first time is shooting, the women do really well on their very first time out, and I love it.
Absolutely.
I love it. I'm like, yeah, wait till you see it. Wait till you see her.
It's totally true. It's totally true.
Neil, I think Pat Golland in those days was a cub master at 422 back in the 70s, maybe. She described how her first husband was an Eagle Scout, and he insisted the boys get involved, and he never showed up again till the Eagle Scout ceremonies, and she very quickly became a cub master. And I'm blanking on exactly how old her sons are. I should know better.
She would be one of the first ones. Now, I knew some of the women back in Colorado in the late, I think it was 1988 when the first official scoutmaster, something like that, was officially sworn in somewhere in the country. And I don't know if it was
Pat was a cub master before that, I think.
She was a cub master. The first scoutmaster was somewhere around 1987, 88. I don't remember exactly the year, but there was much discussion about it when they became scoutmasters. And of course, there was some movement against it at the time. But I think that, those would have been a very interesting moment when Pat would have been around at that moment, because that would have been the moment of change. It would have been the moment of when all that conversation was going on. So speaking of that, which is a really interesting comment, Barbara, is Louisa, I was going to ask you, you're really you're on the vanguard, because you were within a couple of years of women being scoutmasters,
Right now, you're talking to 3 troops that have accepted women leaders as part of it. There's a whole group of them out there that haven't.
Oh, yeah.
I listen to the dialogue around young women joining scouting and all of the pushback from it. There is still a wide segment out there that does not accept women well as the leaders in the unit.
You say we're preaching to a choir.
I'm always, people are surprised. You're a scoutmaster? I mean, partly because they say they're scouting in New York. But it is surprising to people if I tell them that I'm a scoutmaster and have been a scoutmaster for a number of years. And I became a scoutmaster because there wasn't anyone else there. And I needed a troop to go along with the Cub Scout pack that I was bringing up. And so I needed someone in that, and no one else said, hey, I'll do it. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And I've kind of been there since.
That's somehow
And
so
there have been parents in the group that have not been comfortable with it, I think. They have not necessarily said it out loud, but I think some people have left because there was some discomfort.
Did you ever have a conversation? Now, they haven't said much to you. Did you ever have a moment when you felt like you could have a conversation about that? Or how was it? How was it in those moments when you felt like a parent was saying, you know, I feel uncomfortable about this and I'm going to do something about my boy, the women leaders in charge? What was those moments? Can you give like a moment that you can remember of that kind of thing?
I can't think of anything specifically, but I know the sense was there.
It
With,
was like intuitive. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just the feeling that you couldn't possibly know how to do this.
Neil,
I grew up in,
I'm sorry, no, go ahead, Louise.
Hi, Barbara.
I grew up out in the country, and we had a hunting lodge outside of Penn State, so I was even comfortable with outhouses. People couldn't understand that. How a woman that grew up in was living in New York City with all the comforts, that I didn't mind going out and using an outhouse. I didn't like it, but if that was where I had to use, that was what I used.
Me
And
too.
the boys are always impressed when I'll go out and pick up the snake or the frog, or they'll come into the campsite and say, look what I've got. And oh, okay.
I was going to say that back in the 50s when I was growing up, mothers were very involved with Cub Scouts. The Cub Scout
Right.
dens met in the mother's apartment, two mothers as den mothers. They met in their apartments and they provided the leadership at the Cub level.
But they weren't called leaders, Barbara. They were den mothers.
Right.
And mothers, yeah.
They
Me too
were
in the
still
70s.
mothers. They
Right.
were not leaders.
But they were the ones who ran the Cub program.
They ran it, but they weren't allowed to be called leaders. And we have pushed that boundary when,
You have.
I think about the time that you and I came in, that was about the time they started saying, well, maybe they are a leader. Because
I remember I was working for National Camp School, and I remember the whole discussion about, I don't remember the year that it was, but I remember the discussion about the first official scoutmaster, and I think she was from the East Coast. I don't know exactly who it was, but I remember that moment that they were willing to call you a scoutmaster if that's the position you had, and that's essentially what you're running the troop. That's, that says volumes about that period before that moment, and it's interesting, and that's why I love having you, Louisa, because I think you provide perspective of what's changed over the years and how it's different. And it's really interesting to hear Robin and Tina and the men are doing the things that men always do, right? They still have those bad behaviors sometimes, we like that, we admit that, right? It's our flaws. Okay, but at the same time, you're also talking about the incredible openness that the troop is, that men have really come to a point where, like, we need you when you step up, and it's a part of scouting these days to know that that's true, and you are experts at what you do, and we want you, despite that marketing moment. Tina, if you told me for 2 seconds about that, I would have turned to you and just basically said, you run the marketing, make it happen, let's have this go on. That's I think things have changed in a good way, is what I'm trying to say.
One thing I have to say is, one thing I'm encouraged by is the response and the respect I get from the scouts that I work with. They are interested in my opinion. They are interested in what I have to say. They are interested in what I help to organize. And that is really the important thing. I don't care who else.
Yeah, you don't care
like
about
it.
the other adult leaders. If the scouts really respect you, and they do, that's the great thing, is that you're right. I think that's the most important marker now, is that honestly, I don't know, in our troop too, I don't, the women have great respect. It's just sort of a thing where I think we've come to a point where, I'm not saying across the board, and you're right, Louisa, we're talking to, seems to be a whole choir here in New York City, which is fantastic. I can't speak to everybody, but this is kind of a really positive conversation. But I really get a feeling that we've turned a corner, especially with Scouts BSA, in that there seems to be a sense of the Scouts completely recognize the adult leadership of the women, and there's never a question about what your excellence is. At least from coming to the Scouts, it's really kind of amazing for me to watch. And that is the moment at which we can be very proud, because that's the thing that matters, is how do they perceive themselves as the Scouts, you know? And I think that's a great moment.
You know, I recently was reflecting, I volunteered to serve on a bar association committee dealing with young lawyers. And, you know, I'm in my 70s. And I said, but what one value I bring is I am very comfortable talking with young people, and they are very comfortable talking with me. And that probably reflects the 30 years involvement in Scouts. I mean, I walk around the neighborhood. Kids, you know, young people in their late 20s, even younger, come up and talk to me. And once I was going over on 14th Street to Trader Joe, and there's a pizza place about half a block from it. And a young boy, about 12, who's in our troop, I was talking about buying high school, so he might have been just about 13, was sitting there eating. He jumped up, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Cook, so good to see you," and started chatting away about what he was doing and things. And then finally we talked, and he said, "Oh, I really better get home." And then there was an old man sitting on the bench next to me. And he said, next to him, he said, "Are you a school teacher? I've never seen a young person speak voluntarily, enthusiastically to an older person." And I said, "No, I'm involved with Scouts."
That's what Scouts does, doesn't it?
It really, as I said, just reflecting on it now, they're comfortable, I'm comfortable.
It's an amazing moment, right? And we all get that. And that's one of the things we can all share, you know. My last question, and then I want to, you know, kind of sum this up. One little like quick response from each of you. I'll start with Tina, and then Robin, and then Louisa. What do you think is the next set of hurdles with Scouts BSA now, with the gals coming in? Do you think there's any hurdles still left out there, or are we making progress in that world too? So what I'm asking is, there's something there that we should all be aware of as the girls are entering our troops. You know, we've had a couple of years now to work with it. Some of us just put our troops together. Like I'd say in 728, we've had about a year and a half with our girls, right?
Right.
But, and over a pandemic. So none of this is really a normal life, right? But I'm just curious if any one of you has like a thought about the next set of hurdles for welcoming women, and particularly in this case, welcoming the girls into Scouting, and if there's any hurdle out there that is an issue. Does that make sense, what I'm asking? Like something to think about there a little bit, just from your perspective. So Tina, do you have anything that you could add to that? You're muted. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to
You're not
think
sure
about
there's
that
any
more.
hurdles? Yeah, okay, good. So think about that for a little bit more. What about Robin? Do you have anything that you think about that with the gals entering Scouting, and anything that we need to be kind of conscious of in terms of inclusion, in terms of the way in which we work with the gals as part of our troops?
So I will say, you know, we've had logistic issues with girls in our entering hours because our chartering organization won't provide us any extra space for meetings and doesn't have any additional nights to provide. So we haven't, you know, when at the beginning, when the girl troops had to meet on at a different time or a different location, we couldn't accommodate that at all. So, you know, I can't speak to experience in having girls within the troop, but I've, you know, been in plenty of areas where Girl Scouts have been female BSA Scouts, and also, you know, at summer camps and things. And I think over time, right, all of these boys will get used to the fact that the girls are around, and it will become a non-event, right? Much like it does in other areas. You know, I think it's just sometimes when you're in big groups and you maybe have a troop that hasn't had girls around or isn't familiar with it, then I think it can become, you know, a little more difficult. You know, I don't mean that to say that, you know, our troop hasn't had an issue with it, but I just, you know, I think they're clearly, you can tell when you're at summer camp, right? And there are, you know, girls around there. There are some families or, you know, troops that aren't used to it, maybe aren't quite as accepting of it, but I think it's just going to take time like anything else. And I just think that it's up to, you know, the women who are involved in Scouting now and the men who are just as supportive of the women to keep reminding everyone that this is the way forward, and, you know, that things change and you just have to get used to it all, right? And be open and be kind and be encouraging and be supportive. And understand that everyone's bringing their own background to whatever is happening, and you have to open yourself to it. And, I think it's nice. We had Claudia's troop join us at camp this summer, and, her girl troop. And I think it was like our boys clearly loved it. I think it just brings, look, women bring a nice dimension to everything, right? And it's nice for for all these guys to get this extra perspective and to be able to see that, look how competent all of these girls are. They're doing the exact same things that they're doing. And, I think it's really important to show the power that girls can have, right? And that's something that I think Girls in Scouting is demonstrating. So I'm excited about it.
That's cool. I'm very positive too. We just had a Iron Chef Scout weekends and we had the gals troop right with the guys, and they provided a nice little competition and an extra level of competition. I like it. I like the feeling of that. I like the adding a little flavor into all of that. It was really fun. And you're right about always finding allies in all these questions, whether it's women, you're talking about gay scouts or gay leaders, you're talking about any people of color, all that sort of thing, finding the allies that are there at all times, to never forget that each of us can be that ally, that all of us can make sure that the future is a certain kind of thing that we welcome in. Sounds like we're on the right track. We just have to be conscious all the time. Louisa, any other thought to that sort of thing? What kind of hurdle can you imagine is the next moment with Gals in Scouting and all that sort of thing that's coming up?
I have a slightly different perspective. I work in most everybody knows, I work in the scout shop, and I met with a lot of international scouters. And the question was, why don't you have girls? We've had girls for years. We've always had girls, and they meet with the boys at the same time, in the same place, doing the same thing. And so I kind of looked at what National did and went, yeah, it didn't, it still doesn't feel right to me.
You feel like integrated scouting, it's like one step away from the next hurdle, which is to make some kind of scouting.
I have watched so many changes in scouts over the years. I know that that's probably the next step coming. It makes more, to me, it makes more sense than to have to build a whole another unit with a whole new set of leaders in a different time with different stuff that they're doing, when they're doing the same thing. They're all heading to the same place. They're all making the same merit badges and the same advancement. And why we have to say, well, it has to be separate. And someone said to me the other day too, the idea that many people were concerned about that younger age, like the 11 to 13-year-old. But then at 13, they can be venters, and that's co-ed. Why? Why does a Boy Scout troop have to be separated? And why do we have to be so careful to BSA, Scouts BSA, when in any other country in the world, they're Scouts. I'm a girl or I'm a boy, I'm a Scout. It's no different.
That's
I'm
coming right
a
from the
rebel
mouth
on
of
that one.
That's a hurdle, and that's a really big thing. And I don't know when that's all going to change, but I'm with you. I think it's going to be. I think we're on the step toward that moment, and I think you're right, Louisa. I mean, that's it's great to hear your perspective, because you've seen all the changes from when just the idea of women leaders was a new idea, dangerous, right? Now we have our last hurdle, which is how do we make integrated scouting just like everything else, and eventually that's going to come.
I hope so, because then we can have girls in our troop. I would love to.
Then you can make it possible, right? Because it's the logistics issue.
I hate telling like the Cub Scouts coming up, but what about the girl that's in ours? I'm like, I'm really sorry.
What do we do?
Totally tied, right?
We send you, right?
Yeah, right.
I hear that. So I think we should give them a big round of applause. This was great. I love listening to all of this. Thanks you guys, Tina and Robin and Louisa and Barbara, for being kind of like a spur of the moment addition to what was going on in the panel.
Should have asked. Efren had his hand up.
Oh, Efren, you got something that you would like to ask as a question? I don't mean to move it on if you've got some good question there.
It's not so much a question as it is a comment. You mentioned earlier that I often give you some historical perspective. So at the time that there were rumors that girls might be admitted into scouting, there was a big meeting that was held down at in Manhattan. And there were some rather animated discussions at that time. Many of us would say, yes, yes. There were many no's, and I don't know if anyone here was there. But my position had always been that scouting should mirror society, much in the way that Louisa just mentioned. And a number of the individuals who were speaking out against admitting girls, I knew were attorneys. And just so the record is clear, Tom and Pat were there. They were very much in favor of admitting girls.
And I was,
Yes, indeed, but I don't remember you being there.
oh yes,
So
David and I were there.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So I brought up the legal perspective, which all attorneys were familiar with, that many, many years ago, the United States Supreme Court, mentioning Brown versus Board of Education, said that separate but equal was not acceptable. And a number of the attorneys smiled, put their heads down, and said, all right, maybe you're right. And a couple of them gave the but. But I think it's important that we realize that we, as Neil mentioned, we should be moving towards that next step. And that next step is join the world in one organization. And taking off on that, I'll just mention very, very briefly the fact that it's been emphasized, many of you know I work with NYLT, it's been emphasized to us that we have to have two separate troops, the boy troop and the girl troop. And the girl troop has to have its own leadership. So both at the youth and at the adult level. So here we are running a program with the same choices, and we can't mix the patrols. And that has incurred an additional need for female adult leadership. We have the youth. The girls are enthusiastic. But we need more female adult leaders to run NYLT this summer. So that's my pitch for NYLT. If any of you can help us out in the summer, we need more females. So
It's also
we
your
can
pitch
have
for
the
saying,
girls there.
it's also your pitch for
Absolutely.
saying let's be logistically
Well,
intelligent and
that's the
logical,
point.
right?
Louisa makes an excellent point.
Yeah.
Why do we have to have double leadership? As long as we're all interested in the same goal, which is developing our youth as leaders, as communicators, as problem solvers, and as individuals who respect all of us in the same way.
Always great, Efren. Thank you. So yes, that was a really wonderful, and I didn't know what the outcome was going to be, and I really, I am inspired. Someone was saying here, they said, thank you, ladies, you are inspiring, and Ana Reño said that, and I agree. I think what came out of this conversation, I had no idea what was going to come out of it, but I feel very inspired about a future in which Efren is talking about a future that I think is eventually going to happen. And I think that I'm feeling very inspired about what's happening in all the troops right now and the openness of the men to really embrace women in a really good way. And I think, Louisa, it was so good to see your perspective over a period of time to make that clear. And I'm very inspired by this conversation. It's kind of wonderful. So I should move on so I don't keep you guys forever. Yeah.
Neil,
I think Claudia is.
Neil, can I say
Claudia,
one more thing?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I have seen that has changed over the years is the level of training. When we first started, we would meet and do a training. Now there's a ton of training out there, but it's all online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we have lost something in the interaction with other leaders. Something like this where you at least get a bit of a flavor of other leaders, but when you meet in person, you get a whole lot more stuff than you get off of a video.
I agree.
I would
I
like to
agree.
see more of that happening.
Well, I can't solve all the training in person, although I do hope that is Anthony in the room? Oh yeah. Well, Efren's always part of the training too. But yeah, I think that's being heard. I think people should talk about it. The pandemic is endemic now. So maybe we can start talking about those kind of things. But I can speak to one thing, Claudia. You might be excited about this. I hope you are. You should all come to next month's roundtable because we're gonna have the first in-person in 2.5 years. So my hope is that we're going to do it at the main office, and then you guys can just kibitz together, and we're going to have a chance at least to be in this little, as you say, this little spark or this little flavor of being all in the same space together. And I'd love to see all you guys there. Let's do an old school Crackle Barrel, right? Maybe I'll have one little program where we have a little bit of fun for 5 minutes, but spend most of our time just talking to each other. So I think that's going to be a great thing, and I'm excited about doing it in April. I think we've got enough space for at least 18 to 20 people, maybe 25. We can put it in that main office space, and I agree with you, Claudia. I think it's a moment, it's a time for when we all need to see each other and be in the same space for a moment. There's so many incredible things about doing Zoom that we didn't see at the beginning. Now it's much easier in so many ways because it makes it easier for your schedules, but we also miss the connection. And I think it's time to have a moment where we have a little bit of connection. So you'd segued perfectly into my little comment there. It wasn't exactly what you were talking about, but it does speak to some of it.